What if I told you that the person you'll be 5 years from now is being decided right now? Not by your job, not by your bank account, not by your relationships, but by something far more invisible, something sitting quietly between your ears, waiting for instructions you've never given it. Your brain is the silent author of your entire life. Every conversation you remember, every skill you carry, every decision you'll make tomorrow morning, all of it is being written by a 3-pound organ that most people treat like a forgotten backup drive. They stuff it with information, hope something sticks, and wonder why nothing changes. But here's what almost nobody talks about. There are people walking around right now with the same brain you have, the same hours in a day, the same biology, and yet they learned languages in months, master complex skills in weeks, and remember conversations from a decade ago like they happened yesterday. They're not gifted. They're not lucky. They're not born different. They simply discovered something most people will go their entire lives without learning. And by the time you finish this audiobook, you'll have discovered it too. Your brain is the single greatest multiplier of your existence. When it learns faster, every part of your world begins to accelerate. Your skills sharpen. Your instincts get cleaner. Your confidence grows roots. Your results become impossible to ignore. And when it remembers longer, every hour you've ever spent reading, watching, listening, and trying finally starts paying you back instead of slipping through your fingers like sand. The truth is, the world isn't suffering from a lack of information. We're drowning in it. The real challenge is something quieter and far more personal. It's knowing how to absorb the right things, store them in a place you can actually find them, and pull them up when life puts you in the moment that matters. That's the gap. And in this audiobook, we're going to close it together. We're going to walk through how to upgrade your brain so that learning stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like a quiet superpower. We'll explore why your brain is far more flexible than anyone ever told you, why attention has to come before memory the same way breathing comes before running, and how a handful of simple, science-backed tools can take ordinary effort and turn it into deep, durable mastery. More than anything, we'll talk about how to take all of this off the page and into your real life. Because knowledge that doesn't change how you live is just decoration. This isn't about being a genius. Let me say that again, because the world has sold you the wrong story for far too long. This isn't about being a genius. It's about learning how to learn. Strategically, intentionally, repeatedly. It's about treating the most valuable instrument you'll ever own with the kind of care it deserves and giving it the upgrades that compound quietly in the background until one day you wake up and realize you've become someone you couldn't have imagined 2 years ago. If you stay with me through this, the payoff won't end when the audiobook does. It will follow you for decades, into rooms you haven't walked into yet, into careers that haven't been built yet, into versions of yourself you haven't met yet. Together, we're going to unlock a framework for learning faster, remembering longer, and building a mind that keeps quietly improving year after year, conversation after conversation, challenge after challenge. This is your moment to step into the identity of someone who never stops growing. A person who turns information into ability, ability into confidence, and confidence into a life that actually feels like yours. So take a breath, get comfortable, Let's begin. Chapter 1. Build a brain that learns effortlessly. If you want to upgrade your ability to learn, you have to first let go of an old story that's been quietly sabotaging you for years. The story that the brain you were born with is the brain you're stuck with. It isn't. Not even close. The brain isn't a machine sitting on a shelf, frozen in factory settings. It's something far more alive than that. Something far more responsive. It changes, it adapts, it rewires itself based on how you use it, what you feed it, and what you ask of it. Scientists have a name for this. They call it neuroplasticity. But forget the term for a moment. The truth underneath the term is what really matters. The brain you have today is not the brain you have to live with tomorrow. It can grow sharper. It can grow faster. It can grow into something more capable than you currently believe it can become. And with the right inputs, given enough time and repetition, it absolutely will. Now, learning effortlessly doesn't mean learning without effort. That's a contradiction the world tries to sell you constantly. Learning effortlessly means getting more value out of every single hour you put into the process. Most people don't actually have a learning problem. They have an efficiency problem. They try to muscle their way through information. They reread the same paragraph 4 times. They binge-watch tutorials at midnight, hoping that pure exposure will somehow translate into understanding. But your brain isn't a sponge. Exposure alone doesn't create learning. Processing does. Connection does. Meaning does. Imagine you walk into a kitchen you've never been in before, and someone hands you a bag of groceries. You can stand there holding the bag for hours. You can stare at the ingredients. You can read the labels out loud. But until you actually unpack them, organize them in the fridge, and figure out what you're going to make, none of it becomes a meal. That's exactly how your brain treats information. Holding it isn't the same as using it. Looking at it isn't the same as integrating it. To build a brain that learns effortlessly, you have to give it 3 things: attention, clarity, structure. Attention is what tells your brain something is worth noticing. Clarity is what gives that something a meaning the brain can recognize. Structure is what makes sure the meaning doesn't disappear into the void the moment something else grabs your focus. Without these 3 ingredients, learning stays surface level and slips away like a name you heard at a party. With them, learning starts to feel smoother, deeper, and honestly, more enjoyable than it ever did in school. Your brain is in love with patterns. It learns best when ideas connect to other ideas instead of floating around like loose puzzle pieces with no picture on the box. When you start to see how concepts relate to each other, your brain begins forming networks of meaning, and these networks become invisible shortcuts. They make it easier to remember what you've learned. They make it easier to apply what you know in completely new situations. They even make it easier to come up with original thoughts because your brain has more raw material to remix. That's what real learning looks like. Ideas stacking on ideas. Knowledge compounding instead of evaporating. There's another piece here that almost nobody talks about, and it's quietly one of the most important. The difference between recognition and recall. Recognition is when you see something and your brain whispers, "Oh yeah, I know this." Recall is when you can pull it out of memory with absolutely no help. No notes, no hints, no one whispering in your ear. Recognition feels good. It feels like learning, so your brain becomes addicted to it. But recognition is a magic trick. It's an illusion. Recall is the real thing. Recall is what builds a brain you can actually trust under pressure. The people who learn the fastest are the people who train recall instead of running away from it. That single shift, choosing recall over recognition, will transform how long information stays loyal to you. Effortless learning also means cutting out cognitive waste. Every distraction, every notification buzzing on your nightstand, every mental detour into yesterday's argument or tomorrow's worry steals processing power from your brain. When the mind is scattered, learning crawls. When the mind is centered, learning flies. This is exactly why your environment matters more than you think it does, why your habits matter, why your morning routine matters, why the people sitting next to you matter. They all reduce friction or add to it. And finally, effortless learning depends on something deeper than technique. It depends on identity. If you quietly see yourself as someone who learns slowly, your brain will obediently shape itself around that belief. If you see yourself as someone who picks things up quickly, your brain will rise to meet that expectation too. The brain is always listening to the story you're telling about yourself. So choose a kinder story. Choose a more powerful story. Say it out loud. Say it often. Live into it until your biology catches up. You don't need more lectures. You don't need more motivational quotes scrolling past you on a screen. What you actually need is a brain built for ease, a brain that absorbs without resistance, a brain that organizes without chaos, a brain that recalls without panic. When you build that brain, learning stops feeling like a chore you avoid and starts feeling like a quiet advantage you carry into every room. And once that shift happens inside you, everything else gets a little lighter, a little faster, and a lot more possible. Chapter 2. Train your attention before you train anything else. Here's a hard truth that took me years to accept. Before you can remember anything, you have to actually pay attention to it in the first place. Attention is the gatekeeper of learning. Nothing, and I mean nothing, gets stored in long-term memory if it doesn't get past attention first. It doesn't matter how interesting the topic is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how badly you want it. If your attention isn't present, the information walks right past you and disappears. And yet, attention is the one skill almost no one bothers to train. We pour hours into trying to memorize things, hoping our brain will cooperate, when the real bottleneck happens way earlier in the chain. Memory isn't the first step. Attention is. Memory is downstream. Always. Think about how many times you finished a page in a book and realize you have absolutely no idea what you just read. Your eyes moved across the words. Your brain registered the shapes, but attention wasn't really there. You were scanning, not engaging. And because there was no engagement, there was no encoding. Your brain literally cannot store something it never noticed. That's not a flaw. That's a feature. Your brain is filtering thousands of inputs every second and choosing what's worth keeping. If you don't tell it what matters, it makes that decision without you. This is why attention is such a powerful multiplier. When you upgrade attention, every single form of learning upgrades along with it. Reading gets sharper. Conversations get richer. Tutorials suddenly stick. Books you used to forget start staying with you. It's like cleaning a dirty windshield. Suddenly, you can see the road you've been driving on for years. But here's the part most people miss. Attention isn't just about focusing. It's about removing competition. Your brain physically cannot fully attend to multiple things at the same time. Multitasking is a beautiful lie we've all been telling ourselves since smartphones got handed to us. When you try to learn while replying to messages, while glancing at the news, while half listening to a podcast, your brain isn't paying deep attention to any of them. It's switching rapidly between them, and every single switch carries a cognitive tax. By the end of the day, your brain feels exhausted, but you've absorbed almost nothing. Efficient learners figured this out a long time ago. They traded multitasking for monotasking. One task, one focus, one channel of mental energy. And the difference is staggering. Training your attention starts with cutting noise, mental noise, digital noise, environmental noise. Trying to learn in a state of constant distraction is like trying to plant seeds in the middle of a windstorm. You can throw as many seeds as you want. Almost none of them are going to take root. One of the simplest ways to start upgrading attention today is to take control of your environment before you start working. Put the phone in another room, not face down on the desk, where it's still calling to you, but actually somewhere else. Silence notifications. Clear the visual clutter from your space. Light a candle if that helps. Open a window if that helps. These small adjustments aren't superstition. They're signals to your brain that something important is about to happen, and your brain responds by allocating more resources to the moment. But attention isn't only environmental, it's also internal. Your mind has its own version of distractions. The replay of an awkward conversation from last week, the anxiety about the meeting tomorrow, the daydream about a vacation you keep postponing. These internal interruptions are often louder than the external ones because you carry them with you wherever you go. The key here is something I like to call cognitive presence. The practice of keeping your mind in the actual moment long enough for learning to take root. You build cognitive presence the same way you build physical strength. Slowly, progressively. Start with short windows of deep attention, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20. Then expand from there. I promise you this. 10 minutes of fully present, undistracted focus is worth more than an entire afternoon of half-distracted drifting. The hours you think you've been studying for years, most of them haven't been studying at all. They've been hovering near studying. There's a difference, and your brain knows it. Another underrated piece of attention is intention. When your brain knows why it should care about something, it allocates more attention to it automatically. Learning becomes deeper, faster, and stickier when you give your brain a target before you start. Before you read a chapter, before you watch a tutorial, before you sit down with a book, ask yourself a few quiet questions. What am I actually trying to learn here? What would I love to remember? Why does this matter to me? These aren't motivational gimmicks. They're priming signals. They tell your brain what to consider relevant, and your brain remembers what it considers relevant. Attention also gets stronger through active engagement. If you sit back and consume passively, your mind will wander because it has nothing to do. It's like handing a child no toys and being shocked when they get bored. The brain is built to participate, not just observe. You can activate engagement through small, almost invisible techniques. Ask questions while you're learning. Pause and summarize a section in your own words. Imagine how you'd explain the idea to a younger sibling or a curious friend. Connect what you're hearing to a memory or experience you already have. These small actions whisper to your brain, "This matters. Stay here." And your brain listens. There's also a physical side to attention that we often forget about. Your attentional circuits run on energy. They depend on sleep, on hydration, on movement, on what you ate 3 hours ago. You might be blaming yourself for being unfocused when the real issue is biological. A tired brain learns slowly. A stressed brain learns defensively. A nourished brain learns freely. Treat your attention like a finite resource, something you can protect, invest, and replenish, because that's exactly what it is. But here's the deepest truth about attention, and I want you to really sit with this one. Attention is a choice. You choose what gets to live inside your mind. You choose what gets access to your time. You choose what gets permission to interrupt you, and those choices, repeated daily, become habits. Some people quietly build attentional strength, a deep, steady, almost unshakable presence. Other people, just as quietly, build attentional weakness, fragmented, reactive, easily hijacked focus. Both versions are trained, both versions are chosen. One leads to clarity and competence. The other leads to confusion and mental fatigue that no amount of coffee will ever fix. If you want to upgrade your memory, start by upgrading your attention, because if attention is sharp, memory becomes possible. If attention is dull, memory collapses no matter how hard you try. This single truth will save you years of frustration. You don't have to force your brain to remember. You don't have to grind through endless repetition. When your attention is fully there, your brain encodes naturally, effortlessly, without you even realizing it's happening. So train your attention first. Give it structure, give it protection, give it purpose. When you do, learning gets faster, memory gets stronger, and knowledge starts staying with you instead of slipping out the back door. And one day, sooner than you think, you're going to look back and realize that attention was never just a cognitive skill. It was the quiet competitive advantage that changed everything else. Chapter 3. Turn information into real understanding. If you really want to upgrade your brain, you have to learn how to take information and quietly transform it into understanding. And those two things, I promise you, are not the same. Information is everywhere. It's pouring at you from every direction. Understanding, though, understanding is rare. Information is easy to collect. Understanding takes patience. And yet understanding is the only thing your brain actually keeps, uses, and applies when life calls on you. Data without meaning slips away. Data without context evaporates by morning. But the moment information becomes understanding, the moment it becomes part of the way you actually see the world, it stays. The reason so many people forget what they learn isn't a memory problem. It's a depth problem. They collect information the way some people collect souvenirs from places they barely visited. Pretty in the moment, forgotten by the time they get home. They open a book, highlight a few sentences, feel a little smarter for an afternoon, and then never think about it again. 3 weeks later, they couldn't tell you the main argument of the book if their life depended on it. That's not because they're dumb. That's because their learning never went past the surface. Shallow learning feels productive. It looks productive. It mimics productivity beautifully. But it doesn't produce anything that lasts. It builds the illusion of knowing rather than the reality of knowing. And the illusion is comfortable, which is why so many of us live inside it. Real understanding starts with depth. Depth means slowing down long enough for your brain to actually digest what something means. Most people are racing through content because they want to consume more of it. They want to finish the podcast, finish the article, finish the audiobook so they can move to the next one. But learning isn't a finish line. It's a process of absorption. The brain needs time to convert raw information into something personal. When you slow down even a little, you give your mind the chance to ask the most important question in all of learning. How does this fit into what I already know? Your brain builds understanding through connection. Every new idea has to attach itself to something familiar inside you. If there's nothing for it to attach to, the idea just floats away. It becomes mildly interesting and quickly forgotten. This is why knowledge compounds the longer you stay with a subject. The more you understand about cooking, the easier it becomes to learn a new recipe. The more you understand about music, the faster you pick up a new instrument. The more you understand about people, the more naturally you read a room. Learning isn't linear, it's exponential, but only after you've laid down a foundation strong enough for new ideas to grab onto. One of the most beautiful tools for deepening understanding is something I'd call mental scaffolding. A mental scaffold is a simple structure that explains how something works without flattening the truth of it. Scaffolds let you take messy, complicated information and quietly organize it into something useful. Instead of memorizing 200 individual facts, you start to see the architecture underneath them. This is exactly how experienced people in any field operate. A skilled chef doesn't memorize every recipe in the world. She understands flavor pairings, heat behavior, and seasoning principles. And from those few patterns, she can recreate almost any dish she's ever tasted. That's the magic of seeing structure instead of memorizing surfaces. Another quiet superpower for understanding is asking better questions. Questions wake the brain up. Curiosity activates attention, and attention activates memory. So instead of passively accepting whatever you're hearing, get into the habit of asking, why is this true? What problem does this solve? What's the principle hiding underneath this idea? What would change if the opposite were true? Questions force your brain to reason instead of receive, and reasoning is where understanding actually lives. People who ask better questions don't just learn faster. They tend to live more interesting lives because curiosity is contagious in every direction. Teaching is another quiet doorway into deep understanding. When you try to teach something to someone else, even casually at the dinner table, you're forced to clarify your own thoughts. You have to fill in gaps you didn't know existed. You have to explain the logic without hiding behind big words. Teaching exposes everything you don't actually know and strengthens everything you do. So many people genuinely believe they understand a topic because it feels familiar. But familiarity isn't understanding. Explanation is. Try this one rule and watch how it changes everything for you. If you can't teach it, you don't truly understand it yet. And that's not a failure. That's just useful information. Comparisons and metaphors are also gentle bridges into understanding. Your brain loves comparisons because they shrink the distance between something new and something familiar. When you compare a fresh concept to something you already feel comfortable with, you're building a quiet bridge that lets the brain walk into clarity. Some of the greatest teachers in human history relied almost entirely on metaphor. They turned complexity into something digestible. They turned the abstract into the relatable. Try it for yourself. The next time you learn something difficult, ask, what is this like? What does this remind me of? And watch how quickly the fog clears. Context is another piece almost nobody talks about. Context answers two simple but powerful questions. When does this matter? Where does this apply? Information without context is like having a recipe with no idea when you'd actually want to cook it. You know the steps, but you don't know the moment. When you understand context, knowledge becomes usable. You start to notice opportunities where you can apply what you've learned. And application is the final stage of true understanding. Once you can use it in real life, it becomes internalized. It becomes part of who you are. This also explains something that frustrates so many learners. Why repetition without understanding rarely works. When you repeat something you don't actually understand, your brain treats it like background noise. It feels forced. It bounces off you. But when you genuinely understand something first, repetition becomes powerful. Understanding makes repetition stick. Repetition makes understanding durable. Together, they create memory that doesn't crack under pressure. There's one more habit you have to gently break if you want real understanding, the habit of intellectual hoarding. Intellectual hoarding is when you consume more than you integrate. When books pile up, when courses sit unfinished, when notes never get reread, content becomes entertainment instead of transformation. Your mind becomes cluttered with disconnected fragments that look impressive on the outside but don't actually change you on the inside. The cure is simple, even if it isn't easy. Integrate as you go. After you learn something, pause and ask yourself, how would I explain this to someone I love? How does this connect to my life right now? Where could I actually use this in the next 7 days? That pause is where learning becomes real. In the end, your brain doesn't reward you for how much you've consumed. It rewards you for how much you've understood. Understanding is the bridge between knowledge and capability. It's what turns reading into wisdom and listening into transformation. And when you build this skill, when you start turning data into meaning instead of just collecting it, your brain stops behaving like a storage unit and starts behaving like an instrument for thinking. That's the real upgrade. That's what you've been chasing without knowing the name for it. Chapter 4. Make learning active, not comfortable. Passive learning feels really good. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. You sit on the couch. You press play. You let the words wash over you. You feel productive. You feel like you're growing. You feel like the time is well spent. And for a little while, your brain agrees with you. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about passive learning. It doesn't actually create mastery. It doesn't build memory. It doesn't produce understanding. What it produces is familiarity. And familiarity is one of the most fragile things in your entire mental life. It fades quickly, and worse, it tricks you into thinking you know something long before you actually do. Active learning, on the other hand, is the complete opposite experience. Active learning makes your brain show up to work. It demands engagement. It requires real effort. It pushes you to think, to reason, to explain, to retrieve, to connect, to apply, and to evaluate. And because your brain is genuinely working, the learning becomes deeper, stronger, and far more resistant to forgetting. The difference between passive and active learning is the difference between watching someone cook a meal on television and actually standing in your own kitchen with the knife in your hand. Watching feels easier. Doing builds the skill. One of the most powerful forms of active learning is something most people instinctively avoid because it feels uncomfortable: retrieval. Retrieval is when you pull information out of your brain without peeking at the source. No notes, no backup, no safety net. When you do this, you're sending your brain the strongest possible signal. This matters. Keep this. Strengthen this connection. Retrieval is memory training in its purest form. It rewires neural pathways. It deepens recall. And yet most learners avoid it because it feels harder than rereading or rewatching. But hard doesn't mean wrong. Hard often means effective. The discomfort you feel when you can't quite remember something is the exact moment your brain is upgrading itself. Another form of active learning is explanation. If you can explain something in plain, simple language, without jargon, without notes, without leaning on complicated words to hide what you don't actually know, then you genuinely understand it. When you explain something out loud, you're forced to organize your thoughts. You connect concepts. You expose the holes in your knowledge. You discover whether you actually know what you think you know, or whether you've been faking it to yourself. This is one reason why teachers, coaches, and mentors often grow faster than the people they're teaching. The act of explaining forces active learning, and active learning forces real growth. Application is another quiet powerhouse. The moment you take something you've learned and actually use it, your brain upgrades it from theory to skill. Theory alone tends to drift away. Skill stays, because your brain has now seen it work in the real world. When you apply something, when you cook the recipe, fix the bug, hold the conversation, run the experiment, the learning shifts from conceptual to experiential. And experience leaves a kind of cognitive residue that nothing else replicates. Years from now, you'll still remember the first time you actually used what you learned. You probably won't remember the article that taught you about it. Active learning also flourishes through questioning. Asking good questions turns information into curiosity fuel. Questions activate the mind. They create gaps that the brain genuinely wants to fill, the same way an unfinished story keeps you up at night. Curiosity is one of the strongest forces in memory and attention. Instead of asking, "What did I learn?" try asking, "What didn't I understand? What surprised me? What challenged something I used to believe? Where could this idea actually be wrong?" These kinds of questions turn learning from passive accumulation into something that feels closer to exploration. And exploration is something the brain remembers. Another piece of active learning is transformation. Don't just consume information, reshape it. Take notes in your own words. Turn long paragraphs into quick diagrams. Convert complicated ideas into bite-sized summaries. Break processes into steps. Compare, contrast, categorize. Every time you reshape an idea, you deepen your grip on it. Your brain doesn't really remember what it merely touches. It remembers what it actively reshapes with its own hands. There's something almost magical about taking somebody else's idea and rewriting it in your own voice. It stops being theirs and starts becoming yours. To make learning active, you also have to let go of the addiction to consumption speed. Passive learners rush. They chase volume instead of value. They want to finish the book, finish the lecture, finish the course, finish the playlist. But learning doesn't reward finishing. It rewards processing. If your goal is speed, you'll consume more and retain less. If your goal is mastery, you'll do less and think more. The world is overflowing with people who have consumed mountains of content and can't explain a single piece of it. You don't have to be one of them. You don't have to keep losing what you used to know. Active learning also benefits beautifully from spacing. When you revisit material across days and weeks, your brain reinforces the pathways you've already started building. Spacing works best when each return is active, not passive. Test yourself. Explain again. Summarize again. Recall again. Passive repetition is weak. Active repetition is powerful. The difference is whether your brain is participating or sleeping during the review. Even reading itself can become active. Most people read passively. Their eyes move across the lines. Their brain drifts toward dinner plans. Almost nothing gets encoded. To read actively, you slow down. You highlight selectively, not greedily. You summarize occasionally. You pause frequently. You ask questions continuously. You make the text work for its place in your mind. You give your brain something to do beyond scanning words. There's another distinction worth sitting with for a moment. Passive learning feels good in the moment, but produces almost no real growth. Active learning feels harder in the moment, but produces lasting growth. This is true everywhere. In learning a new language, in mastering an instrument, in understanding a complicated subject, in remembering a person's story, in solving a difficult problem. The brain grows through challenge, not comfort. So if your goal is to upgrade yourself, you have to gently choose growth over ease, again and again, until it stops feeling like a sacrifice and starts feeling like a privilege. Your brain loves efficiency, but it is built by effort. Effort is the quiet signal that triggers adaptation. When learning feels slightly uncomfortable, slightly demanding, slightly humbling, that's often when your brain is doing the most upgrading. The improvement begins with a simple shift in how you see yourself. Stop seeing yourself as a consumer of information and start seeing yourself as a transformer of information. Consumer learning leads to familiarity. Transformational learning leads to mastery. And mastery is what stays with you for life. So make your learning active. Think, retrieve, explain, question, apply, transform, teach. These are the verbs of mastery. These are the daily habits of intelligent learners. When you adopt them, you stop being someone who simply takes in information and becomes someone who actually internalizes it. And once you reach that level, learning stops being temporary. It becomes permanent. It becomes part of you. Chapter 5. Use spaced repetition to lock knowledge in. Memory isn't an event. Memory is a process. Your brain doesn't store information perfectly the first time it meets it. Instead, it stabilizes memory in layers, strengthening connections through repeated retrieval over time. This is why you remember the things you use often and forget the things you only touched once. Your brain is ruthlessly efficient. It keeps what seems important and quietly throws out everything else. Spaced repetition is the gentle way of telling your brain, hey, this matters. Keep strengthening it. It's one of the most powerful tools for long-term memory, and ironically, one of the most ignored. Most people try to memorize through cramming, stuffing huge amounts of information into short windows of time. Cramming feels productive because you can recall the material temporarily. But temporary recall isn't the goal. Retention is. Cramming produces short-term memory that fades fast. It might help you pass a test on Thursday, but by next month, almost everything is gone. Spaced repetition does the exact opposite. It spreads learning across time using intervals that grow progressively longer as the memory becomes stronger. This method aligns with how the brain naturally forgets. As your brain tries to drop information, spaced repetition gently pulls it back, reinforcing the signal each time. The science behind this comes from something called the forgetting curve. After learning something once, your ability to recall it drops sharply within hours and even more sharply within days. Most people just let the memory die. They learned something on Monday, and by Friday, it's faded into background static. Spaced repetition interrupts that curve at exactly the right moments. Just as the memory starts to weaken, you bring it back. You force the brain to rebuild it, and every time you retrieve something on the edge of forgetting, the memory becomes more durable. It becomes easier to recall, faster to access, deeper in your network. There are countless ways to practice spaced repetition, but they all share one principle. Review information at increasing intervals. Day 1, Day 3, Day 7, Day 14, Day 30. The exact rhythm can vary depending on the material, but the logic stays the same. You give your brain just enough time to forget so that retrieval requires effort. And that effort is everything. Easy recall doesn't strengthen memory. Effortful recall does. The harder your brain has to work without completely failing, the stronger the memory becomes. There's something almost poetic about this. The struggle is the strengthening. Now, I want to be really clear about something, because it confuses people all the time. Retrieval is not the same as rereading. Rereading is comfortable. You see the words again, and your brain whispers, yes, I recognize this. Recognition feels like understanding, but it's a magic trick. It's shallow. It creates the illusion of knowledge without the substance. Retrieval asks something far braver of you. Can you remember this without looking? That single question is what rewires neurons. That single question is what builds long-term memory. So when you're studying, every time you have the urge to peek at your notes, pause first. Try to retrieve, even if you fail. The attempt is the upgrade. Spaced repetition works beautifully across almost every domain you can think of. Vocabulary, concepts, skills, procedures, even habits. A pianist uses it when she practices small sections of a piece across days. An athlete uses it when he drills the same fundamentals across an entire season. A surgeon uses it when she runs through procedures repeatedly across years of training. Language learners use it to lock in thousands of words. The method scales because it works with how the brain naturally consolidates information. If you want to remember something for months or years, spaced repetition is the closest thing to a guarantee that exists. Technology has made spaced repetition easier than ever. Digital flashcard apps and review systems can schedule everything for you automatically. You don't even have to think about when to review. The app does it for you. But you don't actually need software to apply this principle. A simple notebook, a calendar, or a hand-built review schedule works just as well. The method matters more than the tool. The structure matters more than the convenience. The point is to revisit information intentionally, not randomly. Random review is barely better than no review. Intentional review is transformative. There's a quiet, emotional benefit to spaced repetition that people don't talk about enough. Confidence. Forgetting can feel discouraging, especially when you genuinely care about what you're learning. You read an incredible book, feel inspired, and then weeks later, you can barely remember the main ideas. That gap between how much you cared and how little you retained can quietly erode your belief in yourself as a learner. Spaced repetition protects you from that. It turns knowledge into something you can rely on. When you can retrieve information whenever you want, you start to feel capable. You start to feel intelligent. You start to feel like you're actually in control of your own learning. Confidence isn't just an emotion. It's a kind of cognitive reinforcement loop. The more you can recall, the more you trust yourself. The more you trust yourself, the more you're willing to learn. But spaced repetition has another deeper purpose that most people miss. It allows knowledge to compound. When ideas stick around long enough, they start connecting to new ideas. When they connect, understanding expands. When understanding expands, learning accelerates. This is why some people seem to learn faster as they get older instead of slower. They've built a knowledge base broad enough that everything new has somewhere to attach. Spaced repetition is what builds that base. It's what turns scattered effort into compound growth. To start applying this in your real life, keep it simple. Choose one topic you genuinely care about. Something you actually want to keep with you, not just consume and forget. After your first exposure, review it the next day, then a few days later, then a week later, then a month later. Each time, don't just skim, retrieve, explain, summarize, question, engage. The effort is what makes it stick. In the end, spaced repetition isn't really just a learning technique, it's almost a philosophy. It rejects the idea that learning happens in a single moment. It embraces the gentler truth that learning is a cycle. Exposure, forgetting, retrieval, strengthening, and then again. That cycle is how knowledge becomes durable. That cycle is how the brain quietly upgrades itself week by week, month by month. And if you keep practicing it, knowledge stops simply passing through your life and starts genuinely accumulating, like savings in an account you actually pay attention to. Chapter 6. Use association to make memory stick. Memory thrives on association. Your brain doesn't store information in lonely little boxes, isolated from everything else. It stores information by quietly linking it to other information you already have. The stronger the link, the stronger the memory. When something is meaningful, emotional, surprising, vivid, funny, exaggerated, or genuinely connected to something you already know, your brain treats it differently. It pays closer attention. It gives it priority. It holds on tighter. This is exactly why you can remember someone's face from a wedding 7 years ago, but completely forget where you put your wallet 10 minutes ago. One had a network of associations attached to it. The other had none. Association is the quiet glue of memory. It takes raw, lifeless data and turns it into connected knowledge. The more you amplify association, the more naturally things stick. This isn't a clever trick. This is genuinely how the brain was designed to work. Your brain evolved to keep your ancestors alive, and survival depended on pattern recognition, not on memorizing isolated facts. When a piece of information connects to an emotion, a place, a story, or a recognizable pattern, your brain locks it in because it senses meaning. Association whispers to your brain, "This matters beyond this exact moment," and your brain responds. One of the simplest forms of association is visualization. When you turn information into a picture, especially a vivid, slightly exaggerated one, memory becomes dramatically easier. Your brain is incredible at remembering images. It struggles, almost embarrassingly, with abstractions. If you meet someone named Rose at a coffee shop and you imagine her holding a giant red rose between her teeth like an old film star, you've just attached her name to a visual anchor. It takes seconds. But months later, you'll still remember her name when half the room can't. Images activate more sensory pathways than words alone, which is why your brain grabs onto them so quickly. Another beautiful form of association is something humans have been using for over 2,000 years. The memory journey, sometimes called the method of loci. The idea is simple. You take the things you want to remember and mentally place them inside a familiar space. Your bedroom, your childhood home, your favorite walk through the neighborhood. Then, to recall them later, you simply walk through that space in your mind. The first idea is sitting on your kitchen counter. The second idea is leaning against your front door. The third is hanging from the ceiling fan in the living room. This technique has been used by ancient orators, medieval scholars, and modern memory champions. The reason it works is that your brain remembers space almost effortlessly. You can probably picture the layout of your childhood bedroom right now without even trying. That's the kind of effortless recall this technique borrows. Storytelling is another deep form of association. Stories are the ultimate memory containers. A long list of facts is boring and forgettable. But take those exact same facts and weave them into a narrative, and suddenly they become unforgettable. Stories give you cause and effect. They give you emotion. They give you context. And context tells your brain how information fits into the bigger picture. This is why you can recall the plot of a movie you watched 5 years ago, but can't remember the dates you crammed for an exam last semester. Stories give your brain something living to hold on to. Lists give your brain nothing. Chunking is another quiet hero of memory. Chunking means taking several separate pieces of information and grouping them into one unit. A long string of numbers is hard to remember as 10 individual digits, but the moment you break them into 3 small clusters, suddenly your brain handles it with ease. Your working memory struggles with large amounts of ungrouped data, but when grouped, it can handle far more because your brain treats each cluster as a single thing instead of many. This is how experts in any field store extraordinary amounts of knowledge. They don't actually memorize more than other people. They just chunk more elegantly. A skilled mechanic doesn't see 1,000 separate parts when he opens a hood. He sees a handful of integrated systems, each one a single chunk in his mind. Association also happens through analogy. Analogies let you learn something new by quietly linking it to something you already understand. When you compare a fresh concept to something familiar, your brain saves enormous amounts of time and energy. It says, "Oh, this is like that," and instantly transfers understanding from one domain into another. Great teachers rely on analogy because it accelerates both comprehension and retention at the same time. Think about how electricity gets explained as water flowing through pipes. The electrical engineering is technically nothing like plumbing, but the analogy gets your brain to a place of understanding almost instantly. That's the power of comparison. Emotion is one of the strongest associative forces of all. If something makes you laugh, cry, fear, or wonder, memory strengthens automatically without you having to do anything. Your brain prioritizes emotionally charged experiences for survival reasons. Think about it. You probably remember exactly where you were during the most embarrassing moment of your life. You remember your first heartbreak in vivid detail. You remember the day someone you love walked into the room with news that changed everything. Emotion etches itself into memory in ways that calm information simply can't compete with. If you can attach even a little emotion to what you're learning, you amplify retention dramatically. This is why a great story changes people while a great lecture rarely does. The emotion creates a sticky surface around the ideas. Even the smallest associations can quietly shift the entire experience. Linking a concept to a color, linking a person to a hobby, linking a date to a memory, linking a word to a smell. These tiny memory hooks add up quickly. Your brain loves hooks. The more hooks you give an idea to hang on, the fewer chances it has to slip away. But here's the deeper truth I want you to walk away with. Association makes learning enjoyable. It turns memory from a mechanical chore into something genuinely creative. When memory becomes playful, it becomes sustainable. When it becomes sustainable, it becomes powerful. You stop feeling like you're forcing information into your head and start feeling like you're quietly building a network. Because you are. To bring this into your real life, you don't need to use every technique at once. Start small. The next time you're learning something new, gently ask yourself, what does this remind me of? What can I connect this to? How could I picture this in my mind? What's the story hiding inside this idea? How would I explain this to someone using something they already love? Each question is a little hook. Each hook strengthens the memory. Memory is rarely about capacity. It's about connection. If you give your brain isolated information, it behaves like a colander, leaking everything out the bottom. If you give your brain connected information, it behaves like a spider's web. And a web doesn't easily lose what it catches. When you learn to associate instead of just memorize, your brain finally starts working with you instead of against you. Knowledge starts to stay. Ideas start to organize themselves. Recall becomes faster. Understanding becomes deeper. And learning starts to feel like something you can finally trust. That's the quiet, life-changing power of association. Chapter 7. Build mental systems instead of collecting random facts. One of the biggest upgrades you can ever give your brain is to stop collecting facts and start building systems. Facts are isolated. Systems are connected. Facts are fragile. Systems are durable. Facts are hard to recall. Systems are easy to navigate. When you start thinking in systems, your brain doesn't have to wade through a sea of disconnected information every time you need to remember something. It uses structure, and structure makes knowledge usable. Most people learn by collecting facts. They gather little pieces from books, podcasts, conversations, courses, late-night videos. They feel smarter because they've accumulated knowledge. But accumulation isn't the same as integration. When you accumulate without integrating, your brain becomes cluttered, like a bedroom where you keep buying new things but never put anything away. You can't remember where things go. You can't find what you need when you need it. You can't apply what you learned without panic. The result is mental confusion instead of mental clarity. You feel busy without feeling capable. Systems quietly fix this problem by creating relationships between ideas. When information is part of a system, it has a location in your mind. It has a purpose. It has context. And your brain absolutely thrives on context. Think about how much easier it is to remember the layout of a city you've actually walked around in than a list of street names you read on a map once. You could memorize 50 street names and forget them by next week. But spend a weekend exploring a city on foot, and suddenly you can recall routes, landmarks, and shortcuts months later. The difference is structure. The difference is meaning. The difference is that one was experienced and the other was just stored. Experts in any field don't actually know more facts than the rest of us. They organize the facts they know into frameworks. A framework is a mental scaffold that shows how ideas relate to each other. When something new comes along, an expert doesn't store it randomly somewhere in the back of their mind. They plug it into their existing system, and that plug-in process is exactly what makes the new information stick. This is why learning any subject becomes easier the deeper you go. Once you have a system, everything has a home. There's a place for every idea, and every idea finds its place. Systems also reduce something called cognitive load. Your working memory has a limited capacity. If every new piece of information requires fresh mental effort to store, learning becomes exhausting. But when new information slides neatly into a system you've already built, the cost drops dramatically. Your brain loves efficiency, and systems are how you give it that efficiency. A simple example of a system is categorization. Categorization groups ideas based on similarity or function. The moment you categorize something, your brain assigns it relationships. It's no longer alone. It belongs to a family, and belonging makes it easier to recall. This is why you can remember hundreds of animals, hundreds of foods, hundreds of songs without ever actively trying. You stored them in categories quietly over the years, and the categories did the heavy lifting. Another type of mental system is what you could call a blueprint. A blueprint is a mental model of how something works. Once you have a blueprint, you can interpret new information faster because you already have a structure for it. A skilled doctor can diagnose a familiar condition in seconds because she has blueprints for symptoms, patterns, and exceptions. A beginner sees the same patient and feels overwhelmed because there's no blueprint yet. The information is the same. The structure is what differs. Knowledge also needs hierarchy. Hierarchy organizes ideas from general to specific. When you start with general concepts, you create mental hooks. Then the more specific details can attach to those hooks naturally. Picture a tree. The big ideas are the trunk and main branches. The details are the leaves. You can't attach leaves without branches. Many learners do the opposite. They try to memorize leaves with no branches to hold them, and the leaves fall off within days. This is one of the most common reasons people feel like their memory is failing them when really their structure was missing all along. Systems also allow something beautiful called compression. Compression means representing huge amounts of knowledge with a small number of principles. Physics compresses an enormous chaos of phenomena into a handful of fundamental laws. Great chefs compress thousands of dishes into a few flavor principles. Wise people compress life experiences into simple, transferable lessons. Mastery compresses complexity. When you build compression into your mental systems, recall becomes faster because your brain doesn't have to search through everything. It just retrieves the principle and expands it as needed. Building systems isn't only about academic subjects. You can build systems for learning itself, how you take notes, how you review what you've read, how you practice, how you apply new ideas. Without a system, learning becomes reactive and chaotic. With a system, it becomes deliberate and almost peaceful. Even your habits become easier when they're part of a system. A habit without a system relies on willpower. A habit inside a system relies on structure. And structure always outlasts willpower. To start building mental systems, you only need to ask yourself a few quiet questions whenever you encounter something new. How does this fit with what I already know? What category does this belong to? What principle explains this? What pattern does this follow? Where would I store this concept in my mind? Each question forces your brain to integrate instead of merely collect. Each question turns information into a system. Another practical step is the way you organize your notes. Most people take notes that act like dusty storage units. They capture information but never come back to it. To build systems, your notes should be reorganized, summarized, and connected over time. Instead of a pile of disconnected pages, you create maps, frameworks, and summaries. You turn data into structure. You stop being a collector and start being an architect. The deepest benefit of systems is something called transfer. When you have systems, you can apply what you know in completely new situations. Transfer is the real measure of learning. If you can take what you learned in one area of life and use it in a totally different one, your learning has matured. Transfer is what separates memorization from intelligence. It's what separates students who can ace the test from people who can solve real problems out in the world. In the end, building mental systems isn't just about remembering more. It's about thinking better. It allows your brain to navigate complexity, handle information overload, and make decisions with clarity even under pressure. When you shift from storing facts to building systems, learning stops being a burden and quietly becomes a strategic advantage. That's how you upgrade your brain for the long haul, not by knowing more, by knowing how everything fits. Chapter 8. Learn faster by teaching what you know. One of the fastest ways to learn something deeply is to teach it. The moment you try to teach, you activate a different mode of learning, a mode that forces clarity, structure, recall, and understanding all at once. Teaching isn't just a way of sharing knowledge. It's quietly one of the most powerful ways of strengthening your own. People often believe they need to become experts before they can teach, but the truth is actually flipped. Teaching is how you become an expert. When you try to teach something, even casually, even just to a friend at dinner, your brain has to take what you think you know and reshape it into something coherent. You can't hide behind familiarity anymore. You can't lean on recognition. You actually have to retrieve the information, organize it, and present it in a way that makes sense to someone else. That single process upgrades your memory in 3 different directions at once. Retrieval strengthens recall. Organization strengthens understanding. Explanation strengthens clarity. All 3 are pillars of accelerated learning, and teaching gives you all 3 at the same time. Think back to the last time you tried to explain something to someone. You probably noticed gaps in your knowledge you didn't even know existed. Teaching exposes those gaps almost immediately. It shows you what you actually understand and what you've only convinced yourself you understand. The illusion of knowing is one of the biggest dangers in learning. It tricks you into stopping too early. Teaching destroys that illusion fast, sometimes painfully fast. If you can explain it cleanly, you own it. If you stumble through it, you found the exact place to keep working, and that's not failure. That's the most useful kind of feedback in the world. Teaching also forces simplification. The ability to take something complicated and make it simple is one of the clearest signs of mastery. Anyone can take a simple idea and dress it up in fancy language until it sounds impressive. That's not intelligence. That's performance. Real intelligence takes a complex idea and makes it feel obvious. This is why the best teachers are often the best learners. They're constantly refining their explanations until the ideas become elegant. Elegant ideas are memorable. They reduce cognitive load. They become easier to retrieve, easier to apply, and easier to share with someone else. Another quiet benefit of teaching is that it forces sequencing. To teach something, you have to decide what comes first, what comes second, and how the ideas connect. Most people don't realize how much sequencing matters until they try to explain something that feels obvious in their own mind but completely confuses someone else. When you teach, you build these sequences consciously. You build little staircases of logic. You build frameworks. And those frameworks become permanent additions to your mental systems, making everything easier to learn later on. Teaching also dramatically increases engagement. When you know that you're going to have to teach what you're about to learn, you pay attention differently. You take better notes. You ask sharper questions. You watch for structure. You notice patterns. The act of learning becomes active instead of passive. Even before you teach a single thing, the expectation of teaching pulls you into deeper thought. You no longer read just to read. You read to explain. And that simple shift reorganizes your entire approach to learning. It's one of the cleanest mental tricks I know. Some of the best learners in the world quietly use this strategy without ever calling it teaching. Writers teach through words. Speakers teach through their voice. Musicians teach through performance. Coaches teach through guidance. Friends teach each other in conversations they don't even realize are educational. Anytime someone explains something, they're teaching. And anytime they teach, they're reinforcing their own knowledge. Teaching also massively enhances something we talked about earlier: transfer. Transfer is the ability to take knowledge and apply it in new situations. When you teach, especially with examples, your brain practices applying information across different contexts. It builds bridges between domains. It forms general principles instead of narrow rules. Transfer is where learning becomes ability, and teaching accelerates that process more than almost anything else you can do. It's also worth noting something many people miss. Teaching doesn't require an audience. You can teach to a friend. You can teach to your journal. You can teach to your reflection in the mirror. You can teach to a younger version of yourself who knew nothing about this topic. Some of the most effective teaching practices are completely private. One powerful method is the explain it back technique. After you finish learning something, you simply explain it back to yourself in your own words without looking at the source. You teach the empty room. You teach the imaginary student. You teach the past version of yourself. And every time you do, your understanding deepens. Another method is to write summaries. When you summarize, you're teaching on paper. You compress the information. You extract the meaning. You filter out the noise. You decide what's essential and what's just decoration. That filtration process is exactly where understanding strengthens. The brain doesn't actually need to remember everything. It needs to remember the essence. Summaries train you to find the essence. Teaching also builds confidence. When you can explain something clearly, your belief in your own intelligence quietly grows. And confidence isn't just emotional fluff. It reinforces cognitive performance. When you believe you're capable of learning, your brain engages more deeply, takes more risks, and handles complexity with less fear. People underestimate how much perception affects cognition. The stories you tell yourself about your own intelligence become the ceiling of what you allow yourself to learn. Now here's an important distinction. Teaching is not the same as performing. Teaching doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require charisma. It doesn't require an impressive title or a stage. Teaching requires intention. The intention to understand deeply enough to explain. That intention is what upgrades your brain. Not the performance, not the polish, just the willingness to wrestle with the material until you can hand it to someone else clearly. To apply this in your real life, you don't need a classroom. You just need a simple rule. After you learn something, teach it. Even for 5 minutes. Teach it to someone in your life. Teach it to yourself in a notebook. Teach it on a walk while talking out loud. Teach it to your dog if you have to. Do it without notes. Do it repeatedly until the explanation feels clean and natural. The moment that happens, you'll know the information has moved from the surface of your mind to the structure of your mind. Learning isn't complete when you understand. Learning is complete when you can explain. That's the moment knowledge becomes part of you. That's the moment your brain genuinely upgrades. And if you adopt teaching as a habit, not as something you do once in a while, but as something you do every single time you learn, you'll grow faster than almost everyone around you, quietly, steadily, permanently. Chapter 9. Read like a strategist, not a collector. Reading is one of the most powerful tools you'll ever have for upgrading your brain, but only if you read strategically. Most people read to collect. They read to finish books. They read to feel productive. They read so they can say at a dinner party that they finished something impressive. But reading without strategy almost always leads to very little retention and even less actual application. Thousands of pages can flow through your eyes and leave almost nothing behind. If your goal is to learn faster and remember longer, you have to gently shift from reading as consumption to reading as transformation. Reading like a strategist begins with changing your purpose before you even open the book. Don't read to finish. Read to understand. Don't read to accumulate. Read to apply. Don't read to impress anyone, including yourself. Read to evolve. The moment your purpose changes, the way your brain interacts with the text changes too. You start scanning for structure, principles, and patterns instead of trivia and quotable lines. You start asking different questions as you read. What is the core idea here? How does this connect to what I already know? Where could I actually use this in my real life? These questions activate attention, and as you already know by now, attention activates memory. Strategic readers also know that not everything deserves to be read in the same way. Some material is light and can be skimmed. Some material is dense and demands slow digestion. Some material is reference-based and is meant to be revisited rather than consumed once. And some books, honestly, are not worth finishing at all, and walking away from them frees you to spend your time on the ones that genuinely matter. Intelligent readers don't measure their success by how many books they complete in a year. They measure it by how much value they pulled out of the ones they actually engaged with. A single book that you read deeply and apply consistently can transform your thinking more than 30 books you rushed through and forgot. To read strategically, you also have to learn how to separate signal from noise. Signal is the part that actually matters. The core arguments, the frameworks, the principles, the insights. Noise is everything else, the filler stories, the repetition, the decorative anecdotes, the padding meant to bulk out a chapter. Many books contain one genuinely powerful idea wrapped in 200 pages of packaging. A strategic reader focuses on extracting the idea, not drowning in the wrapping paper. This isn't disrespectful to the author. This is respectful to your own time. Your hours are not infinite. The way you spend them with a book determines what they leave behind. Another critical element of strategic reading is pacing. People rush because they want to get through material quickly. But rushing kills depth. It kills connection. It kills retention. If you read too fast, your brain simply doesn't have time to process anything deeply enough for it to stick. Reading isn't a race, and there are no medals for finishing first. The real winners are the ones who retain and apply. Slow down for complexity, speed up for simplicity, pause when something hits you, reread when you need to. Reading strategically is a rhythm, not a sprint. Some pages deserve 5 minutes, some pages deserve 5 seconds. Trust your instincts. They're usually right. Annotation is another quietly powerful strategy. Highlighting alone often does almost nothing. Many people highlight obsessively and then never return to a single sentence they mark. Annotation is different. Annotating means responding to the text, writing a note in the margin, asking a question, forming an opinion, drawing a connection to something else. When you annotate, you're having a conversation with the author. You're not consuming passively, you're engaging actively, and that interaction forces processing. Processing strengthens memory. The book becomes a dialogue instead of a monologue. Strategic readers also extract ideas into their own language. If you can't summarize a concept in your own words, you don't fully understand it yet. Summaries compress knowledge. They remove the fluff. They expose the structure. A long paragraph becomes a single sentence. A complex framework becomes a simple principle. Compression is a sign of comprehension. And when you compress something, you make it easier to remember and easier to use down the road. Try this. After every chapter you read, write a single sentence that captures what you'll actually take with you. If you can't do it, you haven't fully digested it yet. Reading strategically also means being selective about what you read in the first place. The world has more information now than you could consume in several lifetimes. This abundance demands filtering. Ask yourself, what do I actually need to learn right now? What's going to move me forward? What aligns with the kind of person I'm becoming? Reading randomly is better than not reading at all, but reading intentionally is dramatically more powerful. Intent makes learning relevant. Relevance makes learning sticky. The book you choose deliberately changes you more than the book you stumble into. Another essential piece is integration. After reading, ask yourself, how do I apply this? Where does this fit into my thinking? What action follows from this idea? Application transforms reading from entertainment into capability. Without application, knowledge stays abstract and forgettable. With application, knowledge becomes skill. And skills stay with you for life, while abstract knowledge fades almost as fast as the dust settling on the cover. Strategic readers also revisit books. The idea that you read something once and then move on is one of the great myths of self-improvement culture. Truly great books deserve multiple readings, because each time you return to them, you're returning with a different brain. You read something at 22 and notice one thing. You read it again at 30 and suddenly notice things you can't believe you missed. You read it again at 40 and realize the entire meaning has shifted. Repetition at intervals turns important ideas into long-term knowledge. Repetition isn't redundant. Repetition is how memory matures. Some of the wisest people I know have a small handful of books they reread every couple of years instead of a long list of books they read once and forgot. Finally, reading strategically changes how you store everything. Instead of leaving information scattered across pages, highlights, and forgotten margins, you organize it into categories, summaries, frameworks, or simple notes. You build a personal knowledge system so that new ideas can attach themselves and compound over time. Books stop being isolated little experiences and start becoming part of your actual thinking apparatus. They become tools you carry with you, not just objects on a shelf. When you make this shift, when you go from being a collector of books to being a strategist of books, reading stops being a hobby and becomes a quiet superpower. You read to learn. You learn to understand. You understand to apply. You apply to grow. That cycle is how you upgrade your mind, one chapter at a time, one principle at a time, one book at a time. Slowly, steadily, permanently. Chapter 10. Take better notes for a better memory. Learning doesn't end when you encounter new information. Learning becomes durable when you capture it, process it, and revisit it. Notes are not just a record of what you came across. Notes are a tool for thinking. The quality of your notes directly affects the quality of your memory and the depth of your understanding. Weak notes lead to weak recall. Strong notes become an extension of your mind. And yet, almost no one is ever really taught how to take notes well. People write down too much, too little, or completely the wrong things, and then wonder why nothing seems to stick. The purpose of note-taking is not transcription, it's transformation. Transcription means copying what you hear or read word for word. That requires almost no thinking, which means it produces almost no retention. Transformation means summarizing, restructuring, interpreting, and connecting information in your own language. When you transform, your brain works harder, and the work is the point. The work is what builds memory. The simple rule is this: take notes the way your future self will understand them, not the way the original speaker said them. Your notes should sound like you, not like the book. Effective note-taking starts with deciding what's actually worth capturing. Not everything deserves to be written down. Notes should focus on ideas, principles, frameworks, steps, definitions, key examples, and the places where you felt your brain light up. The decoration around those things, the filler stories and the repetition, isn't worth your ink. Ask yourself while you're listening or reading, what is actually being said here? What problem does this idea solve? How does this connect to something I already know? These questions sharpen your attention filter. And as you've heard from me throughout this audiobook, attention is the foundation of memory. One quiet but powerful shift is moving from linear notes to structured notes. Linear notes follow the order of the lecture or chapter exactly. Structured notes reorganize the information to match the way the brain actually thinks. The brain doesn't store knowledge as a long, straight list. It stores it as clusters, categories, and webs. Techniques like mind mapping, outlining, and hierarchical notes mimic this structure naturally. They reveal relationships between ideas instead of burying them under bullet points. When your notes look like the way your brain works, your brain finds them again much faster later. There's an old method that still holds up beautifully today, sometimes called the three-zone notebook approach. You divide each page into 3 areas: big ideas on the left, detailed explanations in the middle, a short summary at the bottom. The summary forces you to compress. The left column gives you retrieval cues for later review. The middle holds the actual content. The result is a set of notes designed not just for storage, but for deliberate review and recall. It's simple, it's old, it still works. There's another approach popular among writers, researchers, and curious thinkers. Instead of keeping all your notes in long, bulky pages, each idea becomes its own short note, almost like a small index card. Then you start linking these cards together, based on how the ideas relate. Over time, a network of knowledge forms in front of you. This system mirrors how the brain stores meaning, not as piles, but as webs. When you return to these notes, you don't just reread, you navigate. And navigation strengthens connections in a way passive review never can. But the most important principle of all when it comes to notes is this: review matters. Notes you never revisit become intellectual graveyards. People often treat note-taking like the final step. In reality, it's the first step. Notes are seeds. Review is the water. Spaced review, return it to your notes at intervals, brings them back to the surface of awareness and prevents forgetting. Even brief reviews can save you hours of relearning later. There's something quietly emotional about going back to a note you wrote 3 months ago and realizing how far you've come or how much you forgot. Both are useful. Both are part of growth. Note-taking also expands cognition by extending working memory. Working memory has limited capacity. Only a few pieces of information can be actively processed at once. If you try to hold everything in your head, the brain overloads and learning collapses. Notes free up that mental bandwidth. They let your brain focus on deeper thinking because the temporary storage is handled externally. In this way, your notebook becomes a kind of second brain, not a replacement, but a partner. Another quiet truth: good notes should be personal. They should reflect your voice, your questions, your connections, and your interpretations. If your notes look exactly like everyone else's, they probably didn't activate your brain enough. Add commentary. Draw little arrows. Sketch diagrams when you can. Write the question that came up in your head as you were reading. Add reminders of how you might apply something next week. Personalization turns notes from a record into a memory companion. They become little time machines that take you back to the version of you who first encountered the idea. The physical act of writing also enhances memory. Handwriting slows you down just enough to force genuine processing. Typing is faster, but can lead to verbatim capture and shallower thought. Neither is universally better. Both have their place. Handwriting tends to aid comprehension. Typing tends to aid speed and organization. The right choice depends on the moment and your goal. The real danger isn't how you take notes. The real danger is not thinking while you take them. Examples are another quietly underused form of note enhancement. When you add examples, either from the text or from your own imagination, you anchor information in real-world context. And context makes recall dramatically easier because it shows when and why a concept actually matters. Your brain remembers why far more easily than what. Examples give you the why on a silver platter. Finally, great note-taking has one ultimate purpose: to make knowledge findable later. Notes should be designed for future retrieval. If you capture everything but can't find anything when you need it, your notes are useless. Organize by topic, theme, project, or question. Use simple labels, tags, or searchable systems. A note you can't find is a note you've effectively lost, and losing notes is one of the saddest forms of lost effort there is. When you learn to take better notes, your brain upgrades in multiple directions all at once. Attention sharpens because you listen actively. Understanding deepens because you process and reorganize. Memory strengthens because you retrieve and revisit. Application improves because you can actually find and use what you've learned. In other words, note-taking isn't just a study skill. It's a life skill. It's a quiet daily practice that builds a smarter, kinder, more capable mind, one page at a time. Chapter 11. Turn knowledge into real-world skill. Information becomes truly powerful only when it turns into skill. There is a meaningful difference between knowing something and being able to do something. Many people collect knowledge for years but never convert it. They read about productivity but never change how they actually work. They study languages for months but never speak them out loud. They learn financial principles but never apply them to their money. They understand theories beautifully but never see results in their lives. Learning without application creates a kind of intellectual storage. Learning with application creates real transformation. And transformation is what we're really after, isn't it? To turn knowledge into skill, you have to engage with information through practice. Practice is the bridge between theory and ability. It forces you to leave the safe, comfortable zone of knowing and step into the uncomfortable, sometimes humbling zone of doing. Doing feels harder because it demands feedback. The moment you start doing something, you find out immediately where your knowledge is shallow, where your assumptions were wrong, where you confused understanding with familiarity. Feedback feels uncomfortable, sometimes painfully so, but it is the fastest teacher you'll ever meet. Books can inform you. Mentors can guide you. But feedback is what actually trains you. Skill also requires repetition, but not the mindless kind. Useful repetition is deliberate repetition. Deliberate repetition targets your weaknesses, refines your technique, and tracks your improvement. Blind repetition just burns time and reinforces bad habits. If you practice incorrectly for 1,000 hours, you simply build 1,000 hours of mistakes. If you practice deliberately for 100 hours, you can transform completely. Deliberate practice asks the question, what specifically needs improvement here? And then it isolates that one piece. This is how musicians grow, how athletes refine movements, how thinkers sharpen reasoning, how writers develop their voice. They focus on the small thing that matters most right now, and they work on it until it changes. Knowledge also becomes skill when you compress theory into specific action steps. Big ideas without action steps remain abstract forever. To make them concrete, you have to identify how they show up in real life. Ask yourself, what does this idea actually look like when someone executes it? What's the smallest possible action I could take based on this? How would I know if I'm doing it correctly? Your brain learns faster when actions are specific, observable, and trackable. A vague concept produces vague execution. A concrete step produces actual behavior, and behavior is where life starts to change. To turn knowledge into skill, you also have to practice retrieval under real conditions. Retrieval in ideal conditions, in a quiet room with no pressure and plenty of time, is good for memory, but not for performance. Performance demands retrieval under friction. Athletes call this pressure testing. Pressure testing introduces stress, time limits, uncertainty, or stakes. When you can retrieve and use your knowledge under friction, you can use it in real life. This is when learning truly stabilizes at the level of identity. It stops being something you read about and starts being something you can do, even when the room gets loud. Identity plays a much bigger role than most people realize. Skill doesn't fully stabilize until it becomes part of who you are. If you study coding techniques without ever seeing yourself as a programmer, your improvement quietly plateaus. If you study investment principles without adopting the identity of an investor, you won't actually execute when it counts. Identity drives behavior. Behavior drives practice. Practice drives skill. Skill reinforces identity. This cycle is how mastery quietly builds itself, year after year, until one day you look up and realize you've become the thing you were once just reading about. Feedback loops are what accelerate the cycle. A feedback loop has 3 parts: action, result, adjustment. You take an action. You evaluate the result honestly. Then you adjust. Most people skip the adjustment phase. They take an action, they accept the result, and they move on without learning anything from it. Without adjustment, growth slows to a crawl. Adjustment is where the brain actually upgrades. Adjustment whispers to the brain, "This didn't work, change the approach." With enough adjustments, skill stabilizes. With enough adjustments, you stop guessing and start knowing. Knowledge also becomes skill faster when you use it in multiple environments. If you only practice an idea in one setting, with one type of person, in one specific situation, it becomes situational knowledge. To make it robust, you have to practice it in different environments with different people under different conditions. This forces something called abstraction. Abstraction means extracting the principle from the specific situation. Once you understand the principle, you can apply it almost anywhere. That's the mark of true learning. Not just knowing the answer, but understanding the question well enough to handle it in any room. Timing matters too. Application should follow learning quickly. The longer the gap between learning something and using it, the higher the chance you'll forget. The brain prioritizes what you actually use. If you want to keep something, use it soon and use it often. This turns weak memories into stable ones and stable ones into skills. There's an old expression I love, use it or lose it. It applies almost perfectly here. The final stage of turning knowledge into skill is automation. Automation is when the skill becomes effortless. You no longer think about the steps consciously. Your brain handles them in the background. Driving a car is the perfect example. You don't mentally rehearse every movement anymore. You just drive, while having a full conversation, while listening to music, while thinking about something completely unrelated. Automation frees up cognitive resources, which means you can layer new skills on top of the ones you've already mastered. Mastery is built on stacked automations. The more you automate, the more capacity you have to learn something new. To apply all of this in your own life, start with one simple rule. The moment you learn something genuinely valuable, ask yourself, how do I put this into action today? Not next year, not someday, today. Then identify a small test. A test turns theory into motion. It breaks the perfection barrier. Perfection is the silent killer of skill, because perfection delays action, and action beats perfection every single time. When you learn how to turn knowledge into skill, learning stops being an intellectual hobby and becomes something life-changing. Knowledge alone can make you feel smart for an afternoon. Skill makes you effective for decades. And effectiveness is what shapes your career, your competence, your confidence, your relationships, and ultimately the texture of your entire life. So take what you've learned in this audiobook so far and use even one piece of it today. Don't wait until you've heard it all. Don't wait until you feel ready. Ready never quite arrives. Action does. Chapter 12. Upgrade your processing speed and mental stamina. If you genuinely want to learn faster and remember longer, you have to upgrade more than just your strategies. You have to upgrade the underlying machinery that supports all of those strategies. Two of the most important pieces of that machinery are processing speed and mental stamina. These two abilities are the quiet engines behind everything we've talked about so far. And almost nobody takes the time to train them deliberately. Processing speed is your brain's ability to interpret, analyze, and work with information quickly. Mental stamina is your brain's ability to sustain effort over time without burning out, slowing down, or giving up. When these two abilities improve, everything else in your life starts to feel a little lighter. Reading becomes easier. Solving problems becomes easier. Making decisions becomes easier. Holding focus becomes easier. Learning accelerates almost on its own. And maybe most importantly, life starts to feel less overwhelming because your brain finally has the bandwidth to keep up with what you're asking of it. Processing speed isn't about rushing. Let me say that clearly because people get this confused all the time. Processing speed is about mental efficiency. A slow processor wastes energy on basic interpretation before it ever gets close to deeper understanding. A fast processor reaches deeper understanding much sooner, which leaves more time for practice, reflection, and application. This is one of the reasons certain people seem to learn faster than others. It's not always because they're more intelligent. It's often because they process information with less internal friction. One of the best ways to improve processing speed is to strengthen your working memory. Working memory is the mental space where you temporarily hold and manipulate information. It's the brain's scratch pad. If your working memory is overloaded, processing slows down dramatically. Tasks feel harder. Comprehension breaks down. You lose your place. But when working memory is stronger, thinking becomes smoother. You can hold more pieces in your mind at the same time. You can make connections faster. You can read complex material without constantly going back to the previous paragraph. Activities that involve pattern recognition, sequencing, spatial reasoning, or strategic thinking can quietly strengthen working memory over time. So can real-world thinking exercises like explaining things out loud, solving problems without notes, or organizing ideas mentally before you write them down. Another method for increasing processing speed is reducing cognitive load. Cognitive load is the total amount of mental effort a task is asking from you. When the load is too high, processing slows to a crawl. Reducing cognitive load doesn't mean making everything easier. It means removing unnecessary friction. For example, organizing your environment before you start, minimizing distractions before they have a chance to appear, breaking tasks into smaller pieces, clarifying exactly what you're trying to learn before you begin. Your brain processes best when it isn't fighting clutter, internal or external. Most of us think we have a focus problem when really we have a friction problem. Mental stamina is something different but just as essential. Stamina determines how long you can think deeply before fatigue sets in. Most people can focus intensely for only a few minutes before their attention dissolves. Their brain becomes restless. Their thoughts scatter. They start craving breaks, food, distraction, anything other than continuing. Low stamina makes deep learning almost impossible because deep learning requires sustained engagement. Complex ideas can't be processed in shallow fragments. They need real time and real presence. To build stamina, you have to train it the same way an athlete trains physical endurance. Gradually, you start with short blocks of focused effort and slowly extend them. 10 minutes of concentrated effort can later become 20, then 30, then 45, then a full hour of deep, uninterrupted work. This kind of training quietly creates a mental environment where deep work feels normal instead of painful. Once your stamina expands, tasks that used to feel overwhelming suddenly feel manageable. Books that once seemed too dense start to feel readable. Problems that once seemed too complicated start to feel solvable. Breaks play a crucial role in stamina. Stamina doesn't grow from endless, uninterrupted effort. It grows from cycles of effort followed by recovery. The brain needs moments of rest to consolidate information, reset attention, and replenish neurotransmitters. Short pauses between heavy thinking aren't wasted time. They're maintenance. They prevent burnout. They actually enhance retention. The goal isn't to eliminate breaks. The goal is to structure them intentionally so that they restore you instead of distract you. A walk to the window for 2 minutes is a different kind of break than scrolling on your phone for 20. Lifestyle quietly influences both processing speed and stamina more than most people realize. Sleep is one of the most powerful cognitive performance tools you'll ever have access to, and it's completely free. Lack of sleep slows reaction time, weakens working memory, blunts processing, and blocks learning from transferring into long-term memory. Strong cognitive performance is built on consistent sleep, not occasional catch-up. You can't out-strategize a brain that hasn't slept. Nutrition matters too. Your brain runs on glucose and depends on micronutrients to manufacture neurotransmitters. Hydration matters. Oxygen matters. Movement matters. It's incredibly hard to think well in a body that isn't being supported. So before you blame your willpower or your intelligence, look at the basics first. Most cognitive struggles are biological before they're psychological. Stress is another quiet enemy of cognitive performance. Stress narrows your bandwidth. It shrinks creativity. It slows problem solving. Chronic stress lowers processing efficiency because your brain keeps diverting resources toward threat response instead of toward learning. Learning thrives in environments of curiosity, not threat. Your brain has a hard time growing when it feels like it's in survival mode. So part of upgrading processing speed and stamina is upgrading how you manage stress. Through movement, through breath, through boundaries, through quiet time, through knowing when to walk away from something for a few hours so you can come back to it with a clearer mind. Finally, the fastest way to improve both processing speed and stamina is to engage with challenging material on a regular basis. Easy content doesn't build cognitive strength. Difficulty does. When you read something slightly above your current level, when you solve problems that demand new reasoning, when you engage with tasks that stretch your understanding, you are quietly training your brain. Difficulty is the signal for adaptation. The brain upgrades under challenge, not under comfort. So a small piece of friction in your daily learning isn't a problem. It's the actual fuel. When processing speed and stamina improve, learning becomes something you can rely on instead of something you have to fight for. You start thinking more clearly, understanding more quickly, remembering more reliably, working more deeply. And once your mind becomes capable of sustained, efficient effort, you've gained one of the greatest advantages a human being can possess. The ability to keep learning long after most people have given up. That's not a small thing. That's a quiet superpower, hiding in plain sight. Chapter 13. Protect your brain with better habits and a better lifestyle. You can't upgrade your brain through learning techniques alone. Strategies matter, but the biological machine doing all the work has to be healthy enough to actually perform. A tired brain, a stressed brain, or a poorly nourished brain cannot process efficiently, cannot remember reliably, and cannot sustain attention long enough to reach mastery. Learning is not just a cognitive activity. It is a deeply physical one. The quality of your brain's performance reflects the quality of the environment you give it to live inside. If you want to learn faster and remember longer, you have to protect the hardware that makes all of it possible. One of the most important variables of all is sleep. Sleep is not simply rest. Sleep is neural maintenance. During deep sleep, Your brain quietly consolidates memories, stabilizes what you learned, clears out waste products, and resets neurotransmitter levels. This is exactly why studying late at night and skipping sleep afterward feels so slippery the next morning. Without sleep, your brain has no chance to transfer short-term learning into long-term storage. Students often try to compensate for poor learning habits by sacrificing sleep, not realizing they're destroying the very mechanism that would let them remember anything in the first place. Sleep is not optional for cognitive performance. It is foundational. If you're learning hard but not sleeping well, you're filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Nutrition is another quiet pillar of brain protection. Your brain represents only a small percentage of your body weight, yet it consumes a disproportionately large percentage of your daily energy. It needs stable glucose levels, healthy fats, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals to manufacture neurotransmitters and maintain cognitive function. Diets full of sugar spikes, ultra-processed foods, and inflammatory ingredients create wildly unstable energy patterns that absolutely impair attention and memory. Whole foods, balanced macronutrients, and consistent hydration give your brain the raw materials it needs to work smoothly. Many people blame themselves for having poor focus when the real issue is biochemical. They aren't lazy. They aren't broken. They're just running their brain on the wrong fuel. Movement also plays a crucial role. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain, raises oxygen levels, stimulates growth factors that help neurons strengthen, and lowers stress hormones. Even short bursts of movement can improve mental clarity and enhance learning. The brain and body are not separate systems. They are deeply intertwined, woven together in ways we're still discovering. Physical stagnation often leads to cognitive stagnation, while physical activation tends to wake up the mind. A walk after lunch is not a luxury, it's a learning tool. Exercise isn't just about fitness, it's quietly one of the best cognitive enhancers ever discovered. Stress management is another category of brain protection nobody can afford to ignore. Stress is genuinely useful in short bursts. It can sharpen focus, energize action, and protect us in moments of real danger. But when stress becomes chronic, it becomes destructive. Chronic stress floods your brain with cortisol, which impairs memory, disrupts learning, weakens immunity, and shrinks cognitive flexibility. When stress becomes a background state, your thinking turns reactive instead of reflective. Curiosity disappears. Threat vigilance takes over. Your brain cannot build new neural pathways efficiently when it's constantly preparing to defend itself. Learning requires psychological safety. To reduce stress, you need both external boundaries, like limiting environments and people that drain you, and internal practices like breathing techniques, journaling, mindfulness, or simply learning to reframe stressors as challenges instead of threats. The world won't always cooperate with your peace, but you can build internal practices that protect it anyway. Digital hygiene has become a modern necessity for brain protection, and we don't talk about it nearly enough. Constant notifications, fragmented attention, information overload, and platforms designed to be addictive all tax your cognitive resources in invisible ways. Every time you switch tasks or check your phone, your brain pays a switching cost. These small costs accumulate quickly, weakening focus and draining stamina. Protecting your brain means controlling its inputs. You decide what gets access to your attention. You decide what doesn't. Eliminating digital clutter is just as important as eliminating physical clutter. When your brain has fewer competing stimuli, it can pour more energy into actually learning. There is real freedom in deciding what gets to interrupt you. The way you design your environment matters too. The spaces you work and learn and shape your brain's ability to focus. Bright screens, noisy surroundings, cluttered desks, and chaotic environments create cognitive noise even when you don't notice it. A clean, orderly space sends a quiet signal of clarity and control. Lighting matters. Air quality matters. Even what you can see in your peripheral vision matters. You're not just creating a place to work. You're creating a place where your brain feels supported enough to bring its best self forward. The right environment isn't a luxury. It's an investment in everything you're trying to become. Another piece of brain protection that rarely gets the attention it deserves is rest itself, but not just sleep. Cognitive rest. Your brain cannot run in high-intensity mode continuously without recovery. Rest includes relaxation, daydreaming, time in nature, leisure activities that don't demand structured thinking. These quiet moments allow the brain to reorganize, integrate, and reset itself. Many of the greatest breakthroughs in science, art, and creativity have happened during unstructured rest, not during peak effort. The shower idea, the walk realization, the middle of the night moment of clarity. Rest is not wasted time. Rest is processing time. It deserves a place in your week, not as something you collapse into when you're broken, but as something you choose deliberately when you're whole. Social connection also influences cognitive health more than most people realize. Your brain is wired for interaction, conversation, and community. Long stretches of isolation can quietly weaken cognitive sharpness, while meaningful conversation stimulates memory, language, empathy, and reasoning. Even teaching and discussing what you're learning activates retention pathways. Surrounding yourself with curious, growth-oriented people enhances your cognitive resilience. Surrounding yourself with negativity slowly drains it. The people in your life are part of your brain's environment too, whether you notice it or not. And finally, mental framing matters. A brain that is constantly fed helplessness, fear, defeat, and bitterness slowly deteriorates. A brain that is fed possibility, challenge, meaning, and purpose slowly strengthens. Internal dialogue shapes neural patterns. Stressful thinking produces stressful chemistry. Empowering thinking produces adaptive chemistry. Protecting your brain means protecting the narrative running quietly inside it. Every day, every conversation with yourself, every story you choose to repeat. The point of all of this is simple. Your brain's performance isn't only a matter of intelligence, it's a matter of environment, lifestyle, and habit. When you protect the biological foundation, learning becomes easier almost automatically. When you neglect it, no amount of strategy will compensate for what's missing. If you want to upgrade your brain, treat it like the irreplaceable instrument it is. Nurture it, support it, protect it, and it will reward you with clarity, memory, and capability for years and years to come. Chapter 14. Use technology to sharpen your thinking, not replace it. We are living in a moment unlike any other in human history. Technology can multiply your cognitive abilities if you use it wisely, or quietly erode them if you use it carelessly. Tools that were once available only to scholars, researchers, and elite thinkers are now sitting in everyone's pocket. You can store knowledge instantly, retrieve information in seconds, organize ideas across years, schedule your life, track your habits, even simulate thinking with the help of intelligent software. But here's the critical distinction. Technology should enhance your thinking, not replace it. The moment technology becomes a substitute for cognition rather than an amplifier of it, your brain stops growing. And honestly, this is happening to a lot of people right now without them even realizing it. To use technology correctly, you have to understand its real role. Your brain has strengths and weaknesses. It excels at creativity, pattern recognition, reasoning, abstraction, and emotional intelligence. It struggles with reliable storage, retrieving large amounts of data, and keeping perfect records over long periods of time. Technology is exceptional precisely where the brain is weakest. Tools can hold thousands of facts, references, reminders, and frameworks without ever decaying. So the goal becomes a partnership. You let technology handle what your brain finds inefficient, and you free your brain to do what only it can do. That's the healthy relationship. But using technology without intention leads to something quieter and more dangerous. Cognitive outsourcing. Outsourcing isn't always bad. Your phone remembering phone numbers is harmless. But when you start outsourcing too much, your brain stops building internal structure. Many people now rely on search engines for answers they could have learned. They rely on notes for ideas they never actually processed. They rely on reminders for commitments they never internalized. The result is a brain that becomes dependent rather than empowered. Tools become crutches instead of extensions. And then one day, when the technology isn't there for some reason, you realize how little you actually have inside. To avoid this, treat technology as scaffolding. Scaffolding supports the formation of skill, but is meant to be removed once the skill is stable. For example, spaced repetition apps are powerful tools for long-term memory, but you still have to actively retrieve the information yourself. Note-taking apps are useful for storing information, but you still have to think about that information. Task managers are useful for organizing priorities, but you still have to decide what matters in the first place. If a tool removes the cognitive work entirely, it removes the cognitive growth. The discomfort of thinking is the gym for your mind, and skipping it has consequences. Technology can absolutely accelerate learning when used with intention, especially for organization. Digital note systems, mind mapping tools, annotation software, and flashcard apps allow you to capture, categorize, and review ideas faster than pen and paper alone. Without organization, knowledge sits in chaos. With organization, knowledge becomes navigable. Your brain loves structure, and technology can provide it elegantly when used deliberately. The key word is deliberate. The same tool can be a weapon or a wonder, depending on how you use it. Another category of technological enhancement involves tracking. Data around your sleep, focus, habits, reading time, or performance can quietly reveal patterns that the mind cannot easily see on its own. Your brain experiences life subjectively. Technology lets you see it objectively for once. When you start noticing measurable patterns, like how poor sleep affects your productivity, or how often you actually practice a skill instead of just thinking about practicing it, your decisions get sharper. Awareness improves behavior. Improved behavior upgrades the brain. The data isn't the magic. The reflection on the data is. But technology must never be allowed to fracture your attention. Many digital tools are not designed to support you. They're designed to capture you. Notifications fragment concentration. Social platforms reward novelty over depth. Endless feeds encourage consumption over creation. Your brain becomes reactive instead of reflective without you ever choosing to be that way. A simple but powerful rule for protecting your brain is this: use technology deliberately, not habitually. The tools you choose to open are allies. The tools that open themselves and pull your attention without permission are quietly enemies. There's no shame in this. The systems are designed to win. But you can still choose differently. Another essential principle is to separate cognitive tools from cognitive entertainment. Cognitive entertainment gives you the comforting illusion of learning, watching educational videos, listening to interesting podcasts in the background, browsing endless articles you'll never apply. It looks like growth, but without engagement, application, or retention, it isn't growth. Cognitive tools, on the other hand, demand action: notes, flashcards, writing, practicing, planning, teaching. Both kinds of inputs have value, but only one of them actually upgrades your brain. The smartest learners aren't the ones who consume the most information. They're the ones who convert consumption into capability. That conversion is rare. That conversion is everything. To make technology a multiplier rather than a distraction, create gentle boundaries. For example, designate certain tools for output like writing, note systems, spaced repetition, and problem solving, and certain tools for input like books, lectures, and courses. Keep them separated in your mind and in your habits. Input alone never produces growth. Output forces retrieval, synthesis, and application. When your brain produces, your brain learns. When your brain only consumes, your brain slowly forgets. Another beautiful practice is to combine technology with analog methods. You can brainstorm on paper, but store organized notes digitally. You can practice recall with flashcards, but reflect deeply in a handwritten journal. You can read a physical book, but capture key ideas digitally for later review. The hybrid approach gives you the best of both worlds. Technology for storage and efficiency. Analog for depth and presence. Pen and paper still have a quiet magic that screens can't quite replicate, especially when you're trying to think. The most important shift, though, is mindset. See technology as part of your cognitive ecosystem, not as a replacement for it. Your brain isn't meant to work alone in this modern world, but your brain also isn't meant to surrender. A calculator doesn't make you worse at math if you understand the principles underneath it. A note system doesn't weaken your memory if you still retrieve and summarize. A spaced repetition app doesn't reduce your thinking if you still reason about the material itself. A tool only becomes harmful when it removes the productive struggle that produces growth. The struggle isn't the enemy. The struggle is the upgrade. Ultimately, the role of technology in learning is amplification. Amplify your attention by blocking distractions. Amplify your memory through structured review. Amplify your productivity by organizing your tasks. Amplify your thinking by freeing up cognitive space. Amplify your creativity by storing raw material for future inspiration. When used this way, technology becomes one of the greatest cognitive multipliers of our era. But your brain has to stay in the driver's seat. Tools are extensions of thought, not replacements for thought. Hold that line, and you'll harness the full power of technology while still strengthening the extraordinary capabilities of your own mind. Lose that line, and you'll quietly become a tourist in your own head. Chapter 15. Become a lifelong learner with a compounding mind. The real upgrade of your brain doesn't happen in a week. It doesn't happen in a month. It doesn't even happen in a single year. It happens quietly across a lifetime. The most powerful learners in the world aren't the ones who study intensely for short bursts and then disappear. They're the ones who never stop. They never stop refining. They never stop expanding. They never stop becoming. They've adopted the identity of a lifelong learner, and because of that one decision, their knowledge starts to compound in ways most people never experience. Compounding knowledge is one of the greatest advantages a human being can build. It makes learning easier as the years pass. It makes thinking sharper. It makes memory stronger. It makes creativity feel almost effortless. The compounding mind isn't built by accident. It's built by consistency. Tiny inputs, repeated for years, that quietly turn into something extraordinary. A lifelong learner understands that knowledge is fuel. It powers decisions, it opens doors, it deepens relationships, it builds careers, it rebuilds lives. They don't learn because someone told them to or because a curriculum is forcing them. They learn because they've felt what learning gives them. It gives them leverage. It gives them adaptability. It gives them clarity in a world that keeps changing faster than anyone planned for. The person who keeps learning will always outperform the person who stops. Curiosity is the engine that keeps this whole thing alive. Children learn rapidly because they're curious about everything. Adults often lose that curiosity because they trade wonder for certainty. They convince themselves they already know enough, and the moment that happens, growth quietly stops. So the simplest way to stay a learner forever is to stay curious forever. Keep asking why. Keep asking how. Keep asking what if. Curiosity isn't childish. Curiosity is one of the most intelligent things you can choose to keep alive inside yourself. A lifelong learner also builds small routines around learning. 10 pages a day, 1 meaningful conversation a week, 20 minutes of practicing something that matters. These tiny inputs don't feel like much in the moment, but across a year, they reshape you. Across a decade, they reshape your entire life. Compounding works in small steps. You don't need to be impressive today. You just need to keep showing up. Conclusion: the real upgrade? Remember that question I asked you at the very beginning, the one about who you'll be 5 years from now and what's quietly deciding it. You have the answer now. It isn't talent. It isn't luck. It isn't where you started. It's the way you choose to feed, train, and protect this beautiful instrument sitting between your ears. The people who learn faster, remember longer, and seem to keep getting sharper while everyone else fades aren't gifted. They simply learned how to learn and then refused to stop. That's the secret. That's the whole secret. Skills will fade, trends will pass, tools will keep changing. But the person who knows how to learn will always rise, always adapt, and always find their way home. Your brain is capable of so much more than you've allowed yourself to believe. Faster, sharper, calmer, stronger, kinder, more curious, more disciplined, more yours. All it needs is direction, patience, and your willingness to begin. This audiobook ends here. Your upgrade begins now.